welcome everyone to this latest in a series of webinars from the Open Group. Today's event is being led by Enterprise Architects, and our speaker today is Craig Martin. This is a really good opportunity to ask questions to people like Craig, and we will try and handle as many questions as we possibly can at the end of Craig's presentation. So Craig, if you're ready, can I ask you to start your presentation?
Yes. Good evening, good morning, good day to the audience. I'll be entertaining you for the next hour, so hopefully I can keep you on your toes, just so that you have a face to go with the voice. That's me there, and there's my contact details. I will be making this presentation available on SlideShare as well. So really what I wanted to do today was focus on a journey that we've taken specifically within the education part of our business. And what I want to do is just, as usual, for those of you that have attended some of my talks, there is a bit of context setting that I normally do. So I'm just going to give you a bit of that context in the background. I'm then going to talk around some of the disruptive business models, specifically those within the education sector. And then just kind of talk generally about some of the theory around the MOOCs, and then go into sort of what our experience has been with the MOOC space and the course that we've released into the MOOC space, and then just give you an overview of what that looks like, and then sort of what to expect in the next steps part of our particular journey. So for those of you that aren't aware, we're a multinational organization that specializes in the architecture space. So we really deal with training, staffing and recruitment, as well as the consulting discipline. So we have a fairly well-rounded view of architecture skills, capability, as well as some of the outcomes that you can expect to deliver for a variety of different clients. So that's just a quick one slide of us. Just also, we have done a lot of work, especially within Australia, with the higher education vertical. That gives you an idea of some of the universities that we've worked with. And a lot of that journey has also been around how to deal with the concept of the MOOCs, and from a business model perspective, as well as also just from how that looks like throughout the architecture of those organizations and how to plan some roadmaps going forward. So we've got a little bit of experience that we can leverage. This is one of our favorite verticals, so to speak, and there's some interesting challenges which I'll hopefully discuss more with you this evening. So this is probably a slide that I'm fairly famous for. I keep on referring back to it, and really just to set the context once again is all about what is business all about. There is a utility or foundation we refer to as business, and business ultimately is all about building advantages, prolonging advantages, and reducing disadvantages. And really what gives us that differentiation in the market is how effectively we can innovate, assemble, and mix the foundation aspects of our organization. Now, the challenge for us as business owners, as well as architects, and for whatever discipline some of you in, if you're not in the architecture space, is really this balance that exists between analytical and intuitive thinking. And really, well, where does the balance lie between these two domains? And there are skill sets within organizations that sort of sit in both of those spaces. And really what we're trying to do is work out, well, where's the best place to find true value? Too much analytical thinking, and you really become as the quote says from Albert Camus, society based on production is only productive, not creative, and you sort of lose those innovative, creative aspects. And obviously, if you're just on the intuitive side and the creative aspects, you often lose the business-focused and revenue-generating aspects of business. Great ideas, but how do we make money out of it? So really, the business is all about trying to find this particular balance. And what we often refer to, and especially since we do quite a bit of business architecture, is this concept of coherence. And really, the true value in that innovate, mix, and assemble space is how do I basically get a high coherence in my organization? In other words, getting sort of a systems approach to my organization, getting everything to work in symmetry across the organization instead of fragmented across my business. So this is a concept of coherence, which has got some airtime within the Harvard Business Review, and really the impact of coherence upon is sort of the bottom line of an organization. So ultimately, if we refer back to this diagram, what we've got is a situation where obviously you can't produce the types of advantages and coherency and all of those aspects I've spoken about within business unless you can innovate, assemble, and mix this foundation layer. So we do need that utility layer. And that utility layer is really the focus of what we've developed within our MOOC space, is to first say, well, in order for us to provide true value, what part must we, make a utility within the architecture discipline and within the business discipline, and how can we get more people out there to begin to use and consume this utility, which is the design of architectures for an organization. And really that approach is sort of multidimensional. What we also want to try and do is sort of reduce the time taken for an organization to move through what Martin refers to as the knowledge funnel. So how can we take unresolved business challenges, which kind of sit at the top there, identify the heuristics for them, and move them down into this sort of utility and algorithm space as quick as possible. And that's the journey which we as enterprise architects are internally we're challenged with, and externally with our clients, trying to help them traverse this journey as quick as possible. And that's really the space that we don't want to talk around, this journey that we're traveling within the education sector. So just quickly back to the analytical and intuitive thinking, and starting to move now into the education space, is really there's sort of two areas of skill that one needs to be able to sort of juggle for yourselves individually, as well as for us as business owners, and trying to help businesses design or innovate their business models more effectively. In other words, how can we balance the skills that sit within our staff to be able to get true value from them? And how can we train them more effectively? And how can we make them into greater innovators, but still leveraging and knowing how to use the sort of analytical utility aspects of how to design businesses? So it's really all about trying to find this balance that exists between sort of these the creative aspects and the analytical aspects. And that's the balance space that we're actually looking at now within this MOOC and this education space. So we're saying true value comes from this innovate, assemble, and mix activity. So before we can really provide that true value, let's make sure there's a strong utility base. Let's make sure there's a strong foundation base. And the more people can operate at that foundation and deliver in a consistent standard, and specifically designing businesses in a specific standard, the more that frees us up to then focus more on some of the disruptive aspects of business model innovation. So this term disruption is really the point that I want to try and make, and that's really what's occurring within the education section, is this, the disruption of the industry. And if we take a little bit of a sort of a segue into what this disruption actually means, we can have a look at a couple of examples, and I'll talk around the education disruption as well. And these are a couple of quotes that I've managed to find, and also introduced a couple of my own along the way, just to give you an idea of what the perception was at the time versus what we now know to be the reality. So West Union International, I'm going to have a look at that memo. Too many shortcomings to be seriously considered and of no value to us. Well, history has taught us the telephone has given us significant value. If we look at this one from the editor of a publishing house, I've traveled the length and breadth of this country and walked with best people, and I can show you that data processing is a fad that won't last out the year. Once again, history has proved this particular individual wrong. This one here is probably one of the more famous ones, specifically relating to personal computers, especially considering its origin. I think there's a world market for maybe 5 computers. And we know that there was a significant disruption in the personal computer space as well, which had to cause IBM to rethink their own business model. Right, there's no reason why anyone would want a computer in their own home. Similar type of sort of predictions, which we know have been debunked. This one is one of my particular favorites because it's fairly recent. Okay, you can't offer a product for free. for too long and survive. It's a passing fad. Now that particular quote is actually quite specific to the concept of MOOCs, which I'm going to go into in a little more detail. But if I look at the next quote, it's very similar to sort of a consistent sort of theme that we pick up when we deal with this MOOC space. It's like, well, just like, you know, are we like those individuals before we'd actually adapted to a new disruptive business model, where we're looking at this and saying, well, how can this make money? There's no business model here yet. You're giving away, you know, free online training. That's not going to work. Where's the money? And a lot of people within the education sector are, you know, kind of asking the same questions. And I've even heard the word fad thrown around in a number of the higher education boardrooms, where, you know, that's in effect, oh, we've had online training for ages. This MOOC thing is just a fad. It's going to pass away like all the other online aspects. So we beg to differ, and sort of what we're seeing from the industry is sort of reinforcing that. And what I wanted to do was just sort of deal a little bit with that disruption within the education space, which kind of led to us traveling this MOOC space as an organization. And really, what does it mean to have a disruptive business model, or when I disrupt the industry? Well, you know, it really talks about creating new markets. So there's a new innovation that allows me to create new markets, and because of that new market, develop a new value network or value framework for that market. Right? Until eventually I get to the point where both that new disruptive business model is pervasive within the industry and ultimately displaces the previous types of technology or businesses that existed. And there's a couple of examples which I had a couple of business model canvases which I wanted to throw in here to show you, but probably just short in time. So I've just mentioned them there, you know, around a couple of the ones that are probably are better known for their disruption, you know, specifically like of Dell and their earn before you spend model. In other words, you know, get the money in through the door before they actually assemble the computer, just-in-time manufacturing type of model. The Nespresso model, the recurring revenue streams of those little coffee sachets, you know, that cost 8 times more than a normal spoon of coffee. Right? The Facebook model is all dealing with, you know, getting others to do the work. You know, basically, you know, Facebook works on content, and that's your content, and it's your social life, and they make money from you generating that content from them. And there's a couple of others around Xerox, you know, which really, you know, the original photocopiers were prohibitively expensive, so they had to come up with some new model which effectively changed the industry of, you know, how we did photocopying, and the pay-per-use came into play. So those are some of the disruptive sort of examples that we're all probably aware of within our everyday sort of lives. And that kind of leads me to sort of this space here, which is from an interesting book around disruption within how the world learns by Clayton Christensen, which talks about 2 stages of disruption, and really talking about an innovator you know, makes a product that's, you know, affordable, simple, and easy to use, or at least for the user, that is. But the challenge here is that it's actually quite expensive to build and maintain. So there's still a journey that it needs to travel before scalability factors begin to kick in, and those costs can start to reduce. And that then kicks into the second stage of disruption, right? In which, when that technology change is added, it's much simpler and less expensive to build and maintain, and therefore begins to get the kind of buy-in and adoption required for it to, in effect, displace the market, all right, and cause disruption in the market, ultimately to the point in which it overtakes the older market and the older business models and replaces them. And that tends to occur. You know, disruption doesn't have to occur. Well, let me rephrase it. Disruption will traditionally occur in what we refer to as sort of the blue ocean space. In other words, it's basically creating a new market, it's creating a new value model for that new market, as opposed to just optimizing and innovating around your current business model, which is referred to as the red ocean space. And really, that's what we see occurring within the education sector, specifically around the disruption which needs to occur within especially online education, and that's really sort of opening up the blue ocean area. So I suppose the question is, well, within education especially, why is disruption required? And Roger Schenk brought some interesting facts, and he's got an interesting article which you can look up, which really just kind of talks about this concept of motivation and relevance of the current education model. It's very much that most of the students are kind of turned off school. The classes are focused on passing the next test. It's sort of classroom focused. Students are discouraged from following their own interests. Okay, it's all about a gradual accumulation of the right answers, basically, and really it's very sort of teacher-centric, and the teacher instructing the students through this cycle. It's also traditional whiteboards, desks in rows, books in worksheets, and this is the kind of education space that we currently find ourselves in, and that's predominantly because it sits in what's referred to as a value-added process business model, which is a VAP business model, and this is sort of one of three models that Oystein, Feldstadt, and Carl Stabel came up with, specifically within the education space. And if you look at this model, it's very much traditional sort of value chain, almost supply chain type model, which takes the view of preparing knowledge through textbooks and individuals writing textbooks and lobbying, various organizational divisions within both the vertical and with also the universities and the schools around adopting those textbooks and adopting sort of those so-called leading thinkers into the curricula, and specifically from a content perspective. And that really moves to, well, once those textbooks and that knowledge is adopted, it becomes a delivery to students, in other words, imparting it to them through this traditional model. And there's some aspect of smaller individualized assistance, but it's really a model which deals with the mass production of students, kind of push them through this assembly line, take the content and just get everyone to sort of paint them with the same brush. There's very little room for individualized training because different students have different ways of learning, and this particular model doesn't actually cater for that. So it's very much this mass model, and this is a model which needs to change when it comes to education. This is the model that we see being disrupted when it comes to some of the MOOCs and that being introduced. Now, we acknowledge that change is needed. This model can't continue in its current format, and especially because we do have a new sort of generation emerging. We have all of the Gen Ys popping onto the into the employment circuits. And their way of operating is quite kind of different to how we've traditionally worked and how we've traditionally studied. And there is a lot of misconception about Gen Ys. There's some fascinating articles out there around this new generation, what they expect both from their employers as well as their universities. And there's a big challenge here for us as employers around how do we build a work environment that caters for this particular generation, that really is far more flexible, looking for a much better work-life balance, looking for challenges, looking to be educated, but not just the standard way of sitting in a classroom and being taught, but really sort of tactile, hands-on experience that they can sort of rewrite their traditional learning patterns and really sort of redefine and create new sort of meaning pathways, so to speak. So there is this challenge of this Gen Y sort of looming, and specifically, 2014, we're looking at this 47% of the workforce which is coming online into from that Gen Y space. So how are we as organizations going to educate them in some of the demands coming from this type of addition to our workforce, and even the majority of some of them that are still going into the university space? There is a change that needs to occur, and that generation has specifically driven the demand for some of the changes that have occurred. I'll just skip that one now. So, this for those of you that keep your book collection up and running, these are some fairly good things for you to work at, specifically dealing with some of the disruption that deals with the education industry, disrupting class by Clayton Christensen. He's written the book Innovator's Dilemma, by the way. Some of you might be familiar with that. And a fairly good study of those particular three business models that I'm going to be referring to, not just the value processing model. So put those on your reading list. Definitely something for you to add to give you a little more context around this changing space of education. So disruption, from our perspective, is occurring. Right? We think that the technological change is available to cause that disruption and move us away from those sort of VAT business models that I spoke about. And really the other two models that Felstad and Stubbleton referred to was really these two solution shops and facilitated networks. And the one I want to focus on now is this facilitated networks model. And really, to cut it a long story short, this facilitated networks is really all about the sort of social nature of learning. We can call it social network learning or something to that extent. And it's about a company that really just provides the infrastructure for students to actually teach one another. And the tools and mechanisms required for them to be able to do that effectively within the sort of networked economy of learning and studying. And it's that sort of facilitated network space where we're seeing the MOOCs operate, and I'll give you an introduction to what MOOCs are. So the facilitated networks, you know, really means that for that type of technology to occur, create the kind of disruption that we need, it's got to affect the entire system. That's why the business model for that needs to change. It's not just one or two small aspects. That entire value process, current value chain model for education needs to change. It's not just one or two small changes along the way. And that's what we mean by disruption, is that whole aspect needs to be shaken up. An entirely new value network needs to be created. All right? And the whole network needs to be shaken up because there's all aspects of business models and economic incentives, and all of those things have to reinforce one another. That's the point of those types of business models. They're not just standalone, that's a reinforcing sort of systemic view. And that sort of, once again, reinforces that cohesive business models that we spoke about in the beginning, about those organizations that can create the best cohesion. So those education companies and higher education systems that can create the best cohesion across this entire value network are the ones that will be the more successful. And it also means that this model is slightly incompatible with the older value network. Now, something that's quite interesting has occurred with the MOOCs, which is it's kind of taken a step into this space, but also then almost put the brakes on a little and moved back to an older model. And I've got a slide which will deal with that a little bit later, but they're kind of looking for a space where they can plug in the old network of education, the old model, the VAP model, with this new facilitated network model, and that's where the industry is currently. It's kind of flexing its muscles to see how best these two can work together, right? But really, it's all about disrupting that entire system. So before I head into the sort of MOOC space, I just wanted to hopefully not bore you with a few isms. Now, you know it's really getting late in the night when I start introducing isms into a conversation. Some people might see it as a little bit of theory, but this is almost the roots of the MOOC model. And if you do your homework on how MOOCs originated, you'll hear this concept called Connectivism, which is really brought by George Siemens and Stephen Downes with their education model, and really referred to this concept of social learning through connectivity, right? And it was more about, learning wasn't necessarily about the content, but it was more about your ability to navigate the information, right? And especially us within our consulting industry, we've known this for quite some time, right? You know, the things that makes good consultants, for example, are those that can find the information the quickest and then be able to mix that the most effectively. So this is a concept of connectivism, and really it was one of the sort of inspirations for some of the traditional MOOC models which we originally looked at as we sort of helped organizations with how to deal with this MOOC threat, as they have referred to it as. The next ism, and there's only two, so don't worry, all right, is constructivism. All right, so both of these, connectivism and constructivism, nice, theoretical words, but they really deal with the ability and how to learn, right, and how people can generate knowledge and meaning from taking new learning material and sort of bolting it onto their existing knowledge to create new understanding and new experiences. And then through connectivism to actually feed it back into the network. And that is what this facilitated network stream is all about. That is where the MOOCs need to land up. is to be able to create that sort of infrastructure play where that information, once individuals have used it and consumed it, to create sort of new learning paths and then feed that back into the network so that others can learn from those sort of feeding patterns as well, or learning patterns. And really this is the ISM space and really what drove some of the original MOOCs to be created. And really what we're looking at is a shift away from knowledge held by a few, the couple of rocket scientists and the intellectuals who can write some good textbooks, sort of get them mandated within the various curricula and, in effect, have them taught to all the people within those classes. And really sort of there's that mass-produced painting everybody with the same brush. And that's kind of moving to this more new value network for education, all right? And trying to deal with this concept of, everyone creating learning and training material themselves and learning these new learning paths, and then sharing it back into the network. Students teaching students is really where, the principle of it. And some of you are probably aware, especially who may have done education in the past, the quickest way for you to actually learn is to teach. And that's really what that sort of model looks at. It basically says, you can learn all the theory you want, but when you've actually got to teach somebody and take them through it, it takes you to a new level of understanding. And if more people in a sort of networked social learning structure, right, are able to do that, they're then able to contribute those learning paths back into this sort of this new facilitated network. All right? And what that will result in, all right, is this, it's called Student-Centric model. All right? So the platforms that facilitate the creation of user-generated content. Now, for some of you that have played with MOOCs for a while, you might begin to recognize some of these signs, especially those in red. All right? And what we've got here is how this education disruption is going to affect how we create and use those MOOCs. Now, I know this is a long lead up to specifically how we've done the MOOCs, but I'm just taking you on this journey specifically around how did enterprise architects arrive at producing a MOOC and what did that look like. So in order for you to understand the value of a MOOC and the value of something like enterprise architecture within this type of education mechanism, you have to understand that it deals with creating the masses of people that understand this discipline. What's the best way to get as many people as possible to understand this space is really to introduce it into this disruptive model where we're seeing a lot of this MOOC stuff occur. So that's really sort of a lot of the concept that I'm trying to deal with here, which kind of leads to this model of a student-centric classroom. And ultimately, this is where we want to take the likes of a architecture training, the likes of a Togaf training, those aspects of what I've referred to as all of this different types of models that we're working with. It's a shift away from a teacher standing up front and basically communicating to a bunch of students. And there is a journey that we're on, and you'll see based upon the MOOC that we've released, there is still an aspect of that. There's a teacher standing in front of a video camera and recording content to impart to the class. And that's because there is an element of disruption that still needs to occur within the MOOC space and specifically within some of the online technologies that must occur. So this shift from the centralized sort of faculty and teaching centralized model to a more student-central model is really where the industry is currently spinning and really where we as an organization are looking to also make that shift as we begin to try and get more and more people familiar with the likes of how to do architecture. And that's to try and simplify it to a level that anybody can do architecture and anybody can learn and teach others from that process. Right, I'm going to skip through that and just take you straight into just a light touch on what the different MOOCs are, and then we'll talk around that journey that we've specifically been on. So really the MOOC has a sort of a variety of different definitions, but I suppose the best way to look at it, all right, is to kind of sort of break it down from the right to the left, actually. So basically a MOOC is a course, and that's effectively what we've built, right? And it must have a series of assignments and due dates and exams so that we can prove competency within that space. Right? It's got to be online, but there's also room for hybrid models, and I'll show you the hybrid model that we've done as well. So MOOC doesn't necessarily have to be purely online, but there are still aspects of interacting with other students and creating that sort of social structure that one would need to look for. Now, it's also got to be open, and this concept of open tends to be quite broad within the MOOC space. And really what open means is that it's actually you're teaching content that's actually within the public domain. And Togaf, for example, being the open group, is a classic case of a MOOC because it is an open standard, and the content within that space is open for any of you to consume. So it probably fits more purely into the MOOC space than necessarily some of the other content which may have proprietary information over it and copyright information over it. So really that's what it means by the open aspects. And really the massive piece, well, one can never really tell what is massive. Is it the hundreds of thousands? In one of the bigger ones has been 160,000 students. This particular course that we've released on Open Universities has got 1,000 users currently in it. And really, the industry is actually still trying to settle on, well, what does this concept of massive actually look like, right? And really what's happened is sort of there's two MOOCs that have come into play here. And the industry started out with what was referred to as a CMOOC. That's where we as an organization would like to take this learning experience. And back to my isms comment, this is a connectivism, a connectivist MOOC, which refers to being able to equip students through a facilitated network. Students teaching students in a facilitated manner, right? And some of the original MOOCs started this way, with wikis and blogs and tweets and all of those types of aspects. And this is referred to in industry as a CMOOC, which stands for a connectivist MOOC, right? But what that's sort of hybridized into, let's call it that, is now what's referred to as an XMOOC. And for those of you that have taken any of the courses, as well as the courses that we've produced, we will probably fit more into this space for now, which is the XMOOC. So Udacity and Coursera and edX and all of those would tend to sit within this XMOOC space. And that's really about often it's not as socially related. It's once again content which is sometimes from the universities pushed out to a bunch of students with small aspects of social interaction taking place within that MOOC. So this XMOOC is, for those of you that have done MOOC, is the dominant sort of place where you could expect to do what you're or expect how you're going to engage with that MOOC platform. And that is really where we've built our Togaf space. But there is a sort of cyclical journey that's occurring here. So you can kind of see that although it started out basically as CMOOCs, which is a sort of social learning, students teaching students model, I won't use the word mature, it's kind of gone into this XMOOC space, which is once again sort of a teacher teaching students model. But I do see movements in the industry where it can get more back to that CMOOC and connectivist model, where it starts to get a far more social nature of education. And that's the journey that we as enterprise architects are on as well, and that's where we want to take you as learners within the architecture space and as learners within the Togaf space. Is yes, we've introduced an XMOOC, all right, but there's a journey that we're on here, and that's ultimately where we want to get to, is get into that sort of connectivist mode, specifically around dealing with some of those MOOCs. Now, let me just basically, the whole MOOC model, and specifically since we deal with a number of the universities as clients, and although one of those universities are clients, we're also one of the contributors to the content, and that's Open Universities. And a lot of them are really just tackling this space and trying to figure out what to do with it. And there's a variety of reasons for them to get on board. A lot of them deal just for branding or reaching new audiences. The sort of dominant theme is, well, more as a feeder for gathering large audiences and trying to feed them into more paid for courses. And that's really this model of, well, how do you make money out of the MOOCs? Where is the business model within this particular space? And there's a variety of models that sort of feed within this place, but as most of you know, most MOOCs for now are free. And they need to remain that way if they're going to be a MOOC. So there's other types of models that need to be devised in order for organizations and universities specifically to make money from it. And just from my own experience as well, now I've done a couple of courses, specifically on a variety of the platforms. And some of you might have had similar experiences. Now we would like to better all of these experiences as we progress more to the MOOC model, but some of you might have had similar experiences as you work through this. There's the challenge of learning versus certifying. So, am I approaching this mainly just to learn and gain knowledge versus am I approaching it for some kind of certification to better my career or my job prospects? From my own perspective, it's been predominantly a learning journey. There's also these concepts of synchronous versus asynchronous. So the MOOC that we've developed is what's referred to as a synchronous MOOC, which is really you have to register for a class and there's a defined time for you to work with. But there's a variety of other courses out there that you can join whenever you want and just listen to the recorded content. The problem with that is it's very less community focused and you can't really interact with a broader community as you're all working through the curricula at the same time or the content at the same time. The challenge that I've had and some of you have had as well is around, well, how do I execute this on a mobile platform? How do I sort of have a seamless and disjointed, a sort of a seamless experience from learning the stuff online versus taking it across while I'm on the train and so carrying my learning journey onto the train with me. And that sort of journey that I particularly had hasn't been that seamless. It's been fairly disruptive as I tried to sort of deal with different technologies of sort of annotating notes and working through it. And really this challenge of constructivism and connectivism, I'm not seeing the MOOC models quite there yet. They have a journey to follow, so still very much sort of the teacher-driven model with some sort of social aspects driven alongside it. So why did enterprise architects decide to take this journey, and why did we take it specifically with our Togaf content? Now, one of the things that we provide is Togaf training. So, surely giving away some of our content and teaching for free is cannibalizing our market. And I suppose that's one way of looking at it. But really, we see this drive towards this broader disruptive business model is being far more in our sort of growth lens and really believing in this focus of, well, the more people can do architecture effectively, right, and the more people can understand how to do architecture, the more valuable it will be for us because really the value comes in those innovate, assemble, and mix places. So, this architecture has almost been a bit of a black science or black art sometimes. It's extremely complex and it's very niche operated and there's multiple dimensions that you need to be able to juggle. And really, I agree with that. You need that discipline to be able to tackle some of the complex issues that you tackle within a lot of this, especially big transformation projects and those types of things. But what we're seeing in industry is this need to make things simpler for business people to understand. And for those of you that have worked with tools like the business model canvas, you'll see that's what you'll have a look at that. You'll think, well, that's just a business reference model. But what's happened is it's kind of upped a layer and made it simpler for business people to use, and to start to design business models and innovative business models so that they can actually have an understanding and do business design themselves. And really that's the space that we need to take the architecture discipline. We can't keep it this black art, so to speak. It has to become more pervasive so that more architecture is done according to a standard, and Togaf is that standard. And the more people produce architecture according to that standard, the greater flexibility it leaves us all sitting in the middle layer there to innovate, assemble, and mix, and create better value. So we need to make architecture simpler. And this sort of MOOC that we've developed is our sort of journey into that space. It's specifically designed for an audience that isn't necessarily complex architecture. It's all about trying to get normal business people and give them an understanding of, well, what is this architecture and how can it actually benefit me? Or what happens if I'm a businessman in a small business? How can this benefit me? And that's really the type of effort that we put in to this particular MOOC. Okay. Now, for those of you that are aware, we did kind of start our journey as one normally does. So we had some what we refer to as Firehose Sessions, which run on YouTube, and that's really me giving you an hour and a half of massive amounts of complex information on a whiteboard, and for you to assimilate and try and use in your day-to-day job. So lots of information, quite complex, and we learned from that approach, and that was one of the drivers. It still had lots of views. I get lots of good positive feedback from it. So those of you that haven't looked at it, it's probably worth your while to have a look at it. But the MOOC has taken this to the next level, and really sort of what we're intending to do is move it along across sort of these three phases, which really looks at, okay, phase one is this concept of, let me just study architecture in the privacy of my own home, and according to my own time scale, and then let me come in and do some intensive theory, and then let me back that up with also some intensive practical work. So we want to create this hybrid model where it sort of merges all of these pieces together, and this is really how we're starting to develop and deliver some of our Togaf content. And it really starts with this sort of open university space, and some of you may have registered already for this course. So there it is. It follows a slightly different approach. What we've done is we've broken the videos down only into 4-minute segments, because it's been assessed that people sort of have a 4-minute time span before they start dropping off and losing interest in the topic. So we've taken all of that complex framework of Togaf, and we've broken it down into 4-minute slithers for you. It's really, so it's 4 hours of video all in all, but really broken up into those sort of 4-minute slices. And we've also done something quite unique. I like to draw on a whiteboard, but there's this glass board in front which kind of immerses you into the whiteboard, so to speak, and gives you a slightly different learning experience as you interact. And there's a whole bunch of social and gamification aspects that also sit on the site to help you improve some of your learning aspects as you work through the cycle. Still an ex-MOOC, that particular model, not a fully disruptive model, but we're getting there. And watch the space. There's only a matter of time before the CMOOCs start to spin around again, and this space starts to, the learning patterns of it start to create a whole new dimension. So what's in the MOOC? Well, we've broken it up into 4 modules, and bearing in mind this is an introduction into the Togaf framework. If you want to deal with the complexity, obviously you need to try and sit through the 4 days of some of the classroom training. But I'm fairly convinced that if you were to work your way through this particular course and do some of pre-reading, which, by the way, course attendees often do as well, you should be able to have a solid understanding to begin to apply some of these aspects and possibly even go for your certification. So really what we have is Module 1 dealing with an overview of the Togaf space. As you can see, there's 10 topics in there. Remember, each of those topics are only 4 minutes long. So, quite easily consumable on the train, or while you're having a smoke break, whatever the case might be, and not so much that you've got to have huge notepads next to you and annotate till the cows come home, so that you can begin to grasp some of the concepts. So we've definitely tried to narrow those down and use concepts, a lot of analogies, and you'll see some of those. Those are actually on the glass that we drew those on. A lot of analogies to help you understand this discipline a whole lot better, because we find that the business stakeholders that we interacted with, they didn't get architecture, building blocks and some of those paradigms. Yes, we still need to know those as architects, but when you're selling architecture, you need to know a lot of these sort of broader concepts. Sorry, not broader concepts, a lot of these analogies, so you can paint these stories, and the penny really drops for those individuals once they kind of see those things in action or hear those analogies in action. Topic 2 is all about, well, how do we take you through what's referred to as the ADM, which is the Architecture Development Method. So it's the methodology of how to do architectures. And there we've got 10 topics within that space. Once again, 4 minutes a topic. Some of those topics are quite complex, and it is quite a challenge for us to simplify them and put them into 4 minutes. But really, Module 2 now takes you through a spin of the cycle, a spin through that wheel, and how to develop architectures. Module 3 deals with, okay, once we've got these architectures, how do we transform the business and how do we govern it? And what does change management and some of those aspects look like, and how do we build roadmaps? Those are some of the aspects that we'll specifically deal with in Module 3. Only 9 modules there. Once again, an average of 4 to 5 minutes per module, per topic. Module 4, only really 7 topics here. And this now really talks about establishing an architecture practice, building that capability, understanding your mandate from business and basically how to apply that mandate in order to get buy-in within the organization, and the different career paths that you can take as an architect, which is always a favorite, specifically when you deal with like Myers-Briggs and those types of sort of talent profiling tools, and what makes good architects and what doesn't. So that's really a summary of the sort of 4 modules that you can expect to learn in really only 4 hours of video, so it's not that long. You have the whole of July to work your way through it. So being an ex-MOOC, it starts at a predefined time and finishes at the end of July. But what this means is that you get a far more of a community-based feel as you interact with all the other students, right? And that'll give you some of the, a bit of a more sort of a view into what a CMOOC could actually look like if you apply more social natures to students teaching students. So where do we go? Where to from here? Right, and what we really want to do is shift this architecture journey and take the black art, so to speak, and move it more and more and more into that CMOOC space, and move it into the domain of which students can start to teach students, and we can become less teachers of the discipline and more facilitators and coaches of the discipline through these types of platforms as you travel this journey. Okay, so we become far more engaged in solving specific problems with you as opposed to just standing up there and teaching and drawing on a whiteboard. And that's really the journey that we want to be able to take. And parts of that are starting to occur in our face-to-face model. We still have theory that people need to go through, so reduce that to a sort of a 2-day life cycle as opposed to a 4 or 5 day course, but really reinforced on the back of that with some really comprehensive and interactive workshops. And we've begun to look at some interesting paradigms and technologies within this particular space to make your learning experiences within the sort of phase 3 far more entertaining, as opposed to, well, let me use the word entertaining, but also far more engaging. Right, as you begin to interact with your other peers and your class members to solve specific problems, trying to push the boundaries of the current ex-MOOC space into this sort of connectivism CMOOC. And that's really where we're driving some of these aspects. And still a journey. You saw that causal loop that I drew for you. It started as a connectivism MOOC, and it's kind of gone to the ex-MOOC, but there's still a journey backwards around how do we get to a point where I can get each of you out there who've got masses of experience yourself, lessons learned on how you've applied architectural ways to it. How can I actually get you into a facilitated network under my guidance and coaching, for example, to be able to teach other students in a far more social manner and how you interact through this journey of applying Togaf within the business. And the more of you can do that, and the more interaction occurs and the more lessons learned through that cycle, the more this utility layer at the bottom becomes sort of more pervasive and more people understand how to use it. And we start to show the value that sits above that utility layer of architecture. And really sort of what next? Well, there's lots of interesting things that we're playing with to take that particular aspect of the learning model just a little further. Some of it relates to games and game theory around how we can make that learning experience a whole lot better for you. So this is kind of moving into that CMOOC space again, and kind of look at all social learning and social mechanisms, how would this apply? Now, this isn't immediate, this is on the horizon, all right, and once again, it's that journey as MOOCs are learning and adapting and configuring their platforms as they're becoming cheaper and easier to manage. They start to once again begin to work more in the sort of CMOOC space and start to include some more of those peer-to-peer, student-to-student models that we'd effectively be able to work with. And really, what can you do? I think a lesson to you is to build your own learning network. There's lots of tools available within the social structure, but you can almost now you can almost start to build your own curriculum of where you want to take your careers. There's a variety of providers of the MOOC spaces, and you've really got to be able to incentivize yourself to complete those journeys and interact with your different classes. There's a lot of people that would take these courses. Yes, the dropout rate is quite high because it's a bit of a novelty, but for these courses to be most effective and for you to truly immerse yourself in the MOOC experience, get into the peer-to-peer discussions, get on the social forums, learn from your peers, get them to give you real-world examples as you're interacting with them. So if you're, for example, on the Open to Study, the discussion forums, all of those pieces are what you want to do. You want to interact with the groups that are there, learn from your peers. Don't just necessarily just learn from me, drawing on a whiteboard, giving you this high-level overview. Take advantage of all of the technologies that are given to you there, and you can also earn some badges and rewards for some of the gamification pieces that have been added in. And that's really, what will make your learning experiences in the MOOC space more immersive and far more engaging for you. So that's really my sing and dance, specifically across that journey that we've taken. I'm sorry it took so long in the beginning. The point was I wanted to give you a background of this journey. It wasn't just, let's just do a MOOC, whatever the case might be. It was, well, what's happening in the industry? What are we seeing? We've heard about these MOOCs for a while. Can we take advantage of it? How will it benefit us as an organization? Where do we see disruption occurring? And, well, this is where we're going to play, and this is the journey that we want to take. So hopefully that's just giving you a little bit of an idea across that journey. And we've got 5 minutes left, I think, for a couple of questions.
Well, thanks, Craig. You've really introduced a new subject there, which I think has engaged a lot of people, and it's encouraged a lot of conversation. Couple of questions. The first question just asking, what's the clarification with these kind of courses and professional certification from the Open Group?
Yes, so there is a cycle that most courses need to go into to be certified by the Open Group. So there are some benefits for a course to be certified. That it's gone through a certain amount of quality, and it's been reviewed by the internal mechanisms that sit within the Open Group and basically received their stamp of approval as an accredited trainer. So each course one develops, has got to go through that cycle. So this particular MOOC is a little broader, hasn't gone through that cycle, but it doesn't specifically prohibit you from writing the exam. It's a way of equipping more the masses that sit at the bottom, and you can still effectively get vouchers to go and write your exam, which gives you your certification. So it doesn't prohibit you from getting a certification because this particular one doesn't have that particular stamp.
Okay, just got a question here, just asking for a little bit more clarification. For if people wanted to take the Togaf class you've referred to, how would they go about doing that?
Yes, okay, so Open to Study, which is part of Open Universities. If you just do a Google on Open to Study, you'll get on their homepage and you'll see an introduction to enterprise architecture on the front, and quite simple, just click on it, enroll in the course, and we kick that off on the 1st of July. So as simple as that. I'll get Simon to push out a link to all of you as well on the back of this. Actually, I'll drop it in the presentation as well, just so you at least all know where to go to.
Excellent. So just to clarify, if people want a copy of your presentation, Craig, what's the best thing? If they contact me and I just liaise with yourself?
You can do that. I will drop it on SlideShare. So probably within the next day or so, you should see a version on SlideShare, and you can search for the topic. I'll also send the link to Simon, and he can just push it out to all of you, and you'll be able to download it from there. Okay, Craig, well, I think we're coming up to the end of the hour, so I think this will probably be a good time to call it a day. If anyone has any questions they'd like to forward to us, please do that. We're happy to take those offline and help you. But at this present point in time, I think, Craig, I'd like to thank you for your time, and certainly the hour that you've taken late at night to do this. So thank you very much, Craig. And I'd like to thank everyone for their time today. And please do look out for the future webinar schedule on the Open Group website. So, Craig, have you got any final points you'd just like to make? Just hopefully I'll see some of you on that course, and we can interact via the social mechanisms there. So all the best in your learning journey.
That's great, Craig. Many, many thanks, and thank you, everyone. And I'll see you all again soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.